My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute. This is a lecture on Hindu architecture for my non-Western course at Pratt, given in fall 2014. So, Indian Buddhism. And this is a slide I've shown before. And I'm going to use it periodically. And I'm going to suggest some, that this, we hold these truths to be self-evident, et cetera, comes from, the, well, let's back up. I'm going to suggest that each culture, and these are like 5 major Eurasian cultures, has an inner psychology, has a point of view, and that these psychologies differ. And this is a kind of cliched oversimplification, but we'll sort of use it for a start. So this idea of there being inner metaphysical rights in each individual, all of whom are equal, is an idea of this culture. And in West Europe, later by extension the Americas, there's a notion of the individual with an inner moral compass. So right and wrong, where does right and wrong come from? And the community will make certain decisions and embed them in law, but what do we see in what's going on in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? What's Huck doing? He's drifting down the Mississippi River with whom? Jim, an escaped slave, and he's helping Jim escape. This is he's been told by the preacher, an ethical sin. The law says it's illegal, and he's driven to do it anyway. He says, all right then, I'll go to hell. So he's working from an inner moral compass. And as America's favorite novel, let's say that embeds an idea in this culture. Over here, we have a similar idea of the individual, but subject to fate. What's the ultimate fate? No matter what you do, you're going to... So let's go... So I'm director of research for Timeship, and our backers are, what's this death stuff? It's a disease. Find the cure. Find it, is this genetic cause of death? Fix it. Eliminate death. You can still get hit by a bus, but the inevitability of old age and death, why would we want to put up with that? I was once challenged by somebody to say, show me where a Greek thinker has ever objected to old age and death. It's just not in the literature. We do. Or the West does. So, that's a Greek idea. Similar in a lot of ways, but has that major difference? In the Middle East, in what's called the biblical traditions, one obeys the word of God, or the Creator. In China, we look at next week, China meaning China, Japan, as Far Eastern culture field. The point is to put oneself in harmony with the flow of nature. and to be always careening around, objecting to natural processes is not what you should be doing. Here, this is our subject today. This world is an illusion. Standing behind this world is a transcendent oneness. And it is a mistake and a waste to run around fretting, overly fretting. I mean, you have to make sure you get food on the table for your family, but overly fretting about this world and missing the harmony of your transcendent self with that transcendent world is a waste of this life. The purpose of this life is to make an effort, whatever effort you can in this life, and fundamental to these cultures is reincarnation. You continually, just because you die doesn't mean that anything's gone away, it's just changed. And so the point is to put yourself in a harmony with this transcendent oneness. Now, one might find things in each of these that one might agree with. And so, something to think about. Now, I've got these images here with the emergence of the individual. Here's our Michelangelo's, David. Here's the place for the individual human being at the center of the XYZ axis. Here's the emergence of the individual experienced by the Greeks. And the temple symbolizes the emergence, the separation of society from nature, and then the individual, the freestanding columns from society. Here is a Mesopotamian votive piece with a priest and supplication. Here's the dome of heaven that one is under. Here is a Buddhist figure in meditation, and we'll look at these today. Here's a Buddhist stupa. Here is a Chinese painting. There are people in here, but you don't see them because they don't metaphysically pop the way they would in a Western painting, but rather are integrated with nature. Here's a Chinese temple, and nature flows through it. And it's sort of like to think about, okay, so what would represent our notion of ourselves today? I like to pick this Salvador Dali painting. We were tormenting ourselves in our contemporary world. But that's for other courses. So, India. I'm going to contend, and we'll see as we look at other cultures, that a culture begins by laying down its epic poem and its temple form. And the epic poem depicts the moral structure of the self and the culture, and the temple form exhibits the literal and metaphorical space within which one can operate. And so our epic poem for the Greeks is the Iliad and the Odyssey. For the Egyptians, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. For India, the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is sort of like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then all the Greek tragedies, all lumped together in one massive, takes up a whole row of, a whole shelf of the volumes. The most famous book in the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, which is one section of the Mahabharata. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Prince Arjuna and his cousin have agreed to split the kingdom time-wise. Each will rule for 7 years. So the cousin rules for 7 years, and Arjuna shows up and says, okay, my turn. And his brother says, I don't think I'm going to give it up. So they each line up their armies. And we see this, you see this in Shakespeare, you see this in Western drama. This is a long-told story. history of the English monarchies. Arjuna drives up and down between the two armies in his war chariot and says, I see friends, family, teachers, mentors on both sides, in both of these armies, on both sides here. Why should they all die for my petty ego? I don't need to be prince. This fight should not take place. At which point his charioteer, who is Vishnu in disguise, looms up in his horrific form, giant tusks grinding up these armies. And he says, who do you think you are? These men are already dead. I am become death, destroyer of worlds. And he then instructs Arjuna that he's a warrior. It's his duty to fight. But that this is all ephemeral. And he instructs him about reincarnation and his relationship to subsequent worlds. So kind of the Indian take on what existence is about is encapsulated in this epic poem. So we'll start with Hindu architecture and geographic setting. India was referred to as a subcontinent. Anybody know why the Himalayan mountains loom up here geologically? What's going on? Right. India was a separate continent, and it's moving north, colliding with Eurasia and pushing up the Himalayas. Now, India is quite isolated. So we have the Himalayas to the north, deserts to the west, impenetrable jungles to the east, although culture does spread this way. And it has a lot of seacoast, but poor ports, so that there is not an extensive sort of naval culture. And in highly simplified terms, we have a Neolithic culture here and a invading Aryan culture ultimately from the steppes of Russia. Talked about that last week. It's these Indo-Europeans who spread from the steppes of Russia down into India, all the way up into Scandinavia, bringing with them the war chariot and a triumvirate of three gods, a thunder-wielding god-king, a priest god, and a blacksmith god. And if you look at the Greek gods, you have Zeus, the thunder-wielding king, Apollo, the priest god, and Hesperius, the blacksmith god. And find the same thing in India. Indra is the thunder-wielding king god. And Thor is the thunder-wielding god of the Norse. So, these invasions come in, they mix with the Dravidian people, but they then establish a caste system with themselves on top, the lighter Indo-Europeans, and the darker Dravidians in a lower caste. Now, we say that the Egyptians build pyramids, but everybody builds pyramids. And we say that India has a caste system. Everybody has a caste system, or most traditional cultures do. But it's very severe in India, and while illegal, it is in effect to this day. That you are born into a caste, and it establishes your position in the culture and the society. So here is the Hindu temple, and the Hindu temple has various uses and meanings. Individual worship. You do not gather in a large community the way you would in a Gothic cathedral. It is a cart or chariot of the spirit. We'll see that in a minute. But most important, it is a model of the Hindu worldview. So it's a model of the hierarchical caste system, but it's a model of the Hindu worldview. Ultimately, a Hindu temple is a three-dimensional mandala. A mandala is a diagram of the mind, a diagram of the universe, and a meditation tool for putting the mind in harmony with the universe. Now, we can see that kind of explicitly, but I would say the exact same thing about a Gothic cathedral. Gothic cathedral is a model of the Christian Western world, and it is a tool as you stand there, if you're a medieval Christian, to put you in harmony with the world. So, and the same thing with the Greek temple. So this is a mandala. A mandala is graphically, typically a series of concentric circles and squares. And does anybody know what's going on here? The mandala is the plan of a palace with 4 gates. So these are the 4 gates. So in a way, if we say the Hindu temple is a 3-dimensional mandala, actually the mandala is a 2-dimensional Hindu temple. In other words, the mandala is a 2-dimensional diagram of what is actually 3-dimensional. So as this mandala tradition was very well preserved in Tibet until the 1960s, and in the Tibetan diaspora, some Tibetans ended up at architecture school and they build these big 3-dimensional computer 3D models of mandalas. And we can see, oh yeah, this is actually 3D. Now we have this in Catholicism as well. One of my favorite Catholic figures is Saint Teresa of Avila. She's the Saint Teresa we see in Bernini's sculpture in Erotic Religious Ecstasy. And she wrote a book called Saint Teresa's Castle, in which she speaks about a series of concentric spheres, each representing a palace, and on a throne in the center of the central palace is Christ. And in, for example, the Kala Chakra mandala, in the center is the deity Kala Chakra in Tibetan Buddhism. So there's very interesting parallels between Catholicism and Tibetan Buddhism. So here is one of these mandalas. Here is Lord Kala Chakra, the black or blue figure. He's in sexual copulation with his consort. Somehow Christians don't do that with Christ on the cross. But this is what we get in Tibet. And it's this sexuality is the driving energy of the universe. So here is one of our mandalas, and now here is one built in 3 dimensions. It can be built in computers, it can be built as models. So this is really a 2-dimensional version of this. Now this is a very important mandala, the Vastapurusha mandala. And the Vastapurusha is a wild man, untamed cosmic energy. And in these traditional cultures, they are very aware of and fearful of untamed cosmic energy. And so the cosmic forces, might be the deities, tame these energies, making the cosmos habitable. Otherwise, it would be all chaos. There'd be no law of, no laws of physics. So here's our wild man, Vastapurusha, and he has been imprisoned in a mandala, which tames him. And we've got a 9 square, and then that breaks down to even more squares on the outer perimeter. And the outer perimeter are the arms and legs, which do work. And these are the lower castes. And these are the more crude aspects of the human condition, work. At the center is the Dantian, which is near the belly button, and it's the location of the mind. So a lot of cultures experience the mind not in the head, but in the center of the body. This mandala then imprisons, rationalizes, and divides up the forces of this wild man, and this becomes the plan grid of a Hindu temple. So a Hindu temple is a 3-dimensional Vastapurusha mandala. And Carbonite is telling me that I'm not up to date, and I don't know how to uninstall it because I don't use it on this computer. So here's our temple, and it's in a temple complex, and these Indians are very strong in mathematics, and so we've got all these grids and geometric games going on here. So the Hindu temple is a 3-dimensional mandala giving form to cosmic harmony. So the mandala is, again, a diagram of the universe, a diagram of the mind, but then also a meditation tool for putting the mind in harmony with the universe. Aids in the spiritual quest for transcendence of ordinary phenomenal world, which is considered illusory, when contrasted to the eternal life of pure consciousness. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to Buddhist theology. Now here's Jaipur. This is really fun. So this 9-square mandala can be used not only for a temple, but for a city plan. So in Jaipur, here's our 9 squares, and then we ran into a mountain range, so we put the extra square over here. And these guys just have a ball with geometry. Remember, well, we'll see when we get to Islam, that these people are just really strong on geometry and have really great both plans and ornament in the mosques, the way we see here in this Hindu architecture. Now, in laying out a city, first you pick a day. So you have astrologers pick out an auspicious day to do this. You establish the gnomon, which is the navel of the universe. We saw that in shamanism. Starting with this dot, we draw a circle around it. Now, every once in a while you'll read, oh my God, the pyramids are exactly lined up, east, west, north, south. They must have, that is, any Boy Scout can, or Girl Scout, I'm sure, can do that, in an hour. Actually, it takes a day. Because you simply line up sunrise and sunset, and that's going to give you an east-west axis. So now you can establish east, west, north, south, and you stake out a mandala. You now make offerings and ablutions, which is you sacrifice animals, you spill milk, you spill blood, you spill foods on this ground, and then you plow it under, and you sow seeds, you grow a crop, which is then harvested by animals, plow it under again, and now you draw your mandala and build your city. And now the sacred center of the city, where the temple is going to be, you do it all again. Now, here's the fun part. I have a colleague, an undergraduate, Anthony Caradona, who's very strong on the architecture of ancient Rome and the Renaissance. He, many years, ran Pratt's Rome program, and so they have historians and archaeologists lecturing. And he lectures on the Etruscans. This is exactly how the Etruscans laid out a city. So one of the things I'm curious about is you go from Rome to India, and you get these very parallel patterns. And then you wonder, what's going on here? Remember I showed you the Borobudur and the Mayan pyramid. Why are these things going on? And jumping ahead in the course, I'm going to say they're all the same culture. You know, what we're told are these very different parts of the world share a lot of stuff and have common origins, like these Indo-Europeans. This is an Indo-European ritual. So this is Khajuraho complex of temples. It is covered with erotic sculpture. I mean, groups in every imaginable position. Very explicit erotic sculpture. And this is a harnessing of the erotic generational forces of the cosmos. This is the Sri Yantra, which is another mandala. And here we see these upward and downward intersecting triangles. The upward triangle is symbolic of the male phallus. The downward triangle is symbolic of the female genital area, and they are in interpenetration. And this is foundational to an extensive, elaborate philosophy of the nature of being, that you start with oneness. How do you get from oneness to the phenomenal world? Well, this oneness, for some reason, you know, like the perturbation that lead to the Big Bang, this oneness somehow is perturbated or perturbed and says, I'm alone. The moment the thought comes, I'm alone, there's an I can only exist in the presence of other. So this unity splits and becomes two. And now you've got all the potential for phenomenal reality. And you've got these interpenetrating forces. In Hegelian philosophy, you talk about thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but that there are fundamental underlying forces that start from initial oneness and are generative of the world. The erotic version of this is in copulation, a couple is experiencing oneness and then pulls apart and says, oh, there's somebody else here. And so now they get engaged in self-consciousness and all the troubles of the world. Now, why are women the source of the troubles? Pandora's box, Eve in the Garden of Eden. Because women give birth. And once you have birth, what is the necessary eventual consequence? Old age and death. In other words, the moment there is this self-consciousness, we're then driven into the cycle of life. And so, how do we relate the transcendent oneness to the energy of the cycle of life? And in a certain sense, that's a question that every philosophical tradition, every religion asks. What is the means in Christianity for the relationship between our phenomenal material world and God? How do you get a relationship between these two metaphysically, radically different things? Any Christians here? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is true God and true man, and therefore the bridge between these two realms. So that's how it's done in Christianity. We'll talk more about that because it's also embodied in the Gothic Cathedral. But that's the parallel question to what is being asked here in India. Okay, there's a transcendent oneness, and so the feeling is in these Eastern traditions that there's a transcendent oneness. A lot of Greek philosophy has that idea. Some of Christianity does. The Gnostic tradition in Christianity has that idea. Lots of cultures have that idea. How do we then get from that oneness to the phenomenal world? We'll look at that in China when we look at the Tao Te Ching next week. And so it underlies these philosophical traditions and also is then generative of the architecture of these cultures. Now, we have a high degree of integration in this traditional Indian culture, so that these mandalas are seen as diagrams of the vibrations of the universe. Underlying energy of the universe is vibrations. And if you take a drum and from a band and you sprinkle sand on it, you take a tuning fork, you go boom, put it on there. It'll move the sand around in patterns like that. So they find these patterns in nature. These patterns are reflective of the vibrations of the universe. In vibrations of sound, energy, magnetic forces, etc. And then here's a traditional Hindu woman who each morning, when she gets the time, makes a mandala out of rice flour. During the course of the day, insects and rodents, etc., eat the rice, and it's absorbed into life. And then the next day she makes another one. So there's these ideas that I'm talking about are integral with daily life. And we talked about when we talked about the Dogon, how the way there was this degree of integration was very attractive to the modern architects of the 1960s, who felt our culture, Western American and European culture, to be alienated. So look at these people, how they have this high degree of integration. We should be able to achieve that. this is fundamental to their anatomy and their medicine. So in Hindu and Buddhist psychology, there are 7, they're called chakras. They're not real, but they are energy centers going up the spine. And each one represents a different psychological state. So the first one is at the base of the body, between the rectum and the genitals, and it is pure grasping power. It's unthinking, there's no culture, it's simply pure power. The next one is at the belly button, and that represents social power, that you act in the world for political power. The next one is at the heart, and that's the first one that has a potential for spiritual achievement. There's one at the throat, which is a spiritually rich level. There's one at the third eye, center of the forehead, and that represents God with form. So it's a religious experience, but your God has a form, a personality, a theology. And then at the top of the head is the one for God without form. It transcends all form. Now, there are different Eastern traditions. In some, you want to work, there's what's called a Kundalini yoga. And it's a yoga of activating these psychological levels. And what you want to do is, in some traditions, move the energy all the way up and then out. And then you've blissed out, you're no longer in this world. You walk around in a trance. In other traditions, you want to get the energy circulating up and down, free of all blocks. And then you can function very well in the world. So there are many, many very different traditions in this Kundalini Yoga. Over here is a medical diagram. And the notion is that you're a traditional Eastern doctor, Chinese or Indian, will diagnose 5 pulses in each wrist. Lungs, liver, spleen, heart. And I'm always told that, like when the Dalai Lama's doctor goes around the hospital, the Western doctors, their diagnoses line up 100%. Oh, he's got such a liver problem. Oh yeah, it's right there on the chart. So there are all of these energies flowing in the body. Now we'll talk more about this when we talk about China, but disease is a blockage of the proper flows. What might you do to unblock a flow in China? Acupuncture needles. That's what acupuncture does. It unblocks a blocked flow to get proper harmonic flow. So here's a diagram of this energy, and it extends beyond the body. Now, I have a very hardcore scientific brother-in-law that I think, we've come a lot closer over the decades. But I used to like to give him a hard time going way back in time before cable TV. I'm in the room with him, and he is, I'm saying, well, there's all these energies around the body. He said, what is that BS? I said, turn on the TV. So he turns it on. I walk over to the rabbit ears antenna, and I go like this. And the picture starts jumping around. It's right there. Obviously, there's some type of electromagnetic energy. Nothing mysterious. We all know that. You hold the antenna like this. You go back to the old rabbit ears days. Or, your cell phone. Well, walk over to this, it's like, I had this woman who did websites for me, and she says, I have to stand on my bed to get a signal to talk on my cell phone. So, these energies are all around us. These people feel that without electronic equipment, they can be plugged into them. So, Malapuram, India, Dharmaraja and other Roth or Cart temples. So here is a certain temple type. Very famously, there was a competition held, this one won, for the new temple type by a king, had a competition, and architects carved out of actual, this was a hill of solid rock. They carved these different temples. So, Dharma is the teaching, and Raja is rule. So you hear a term like the British Raj in India. That was the time of the British rule in India. And Dharma is teaching. And Rath is cart, temples. Here's the competition. There's the one that won and became the dominant temple type. Now, this is a Lingaraja temple, and the lingam is the male phallus. So this is the womb cavern, and this is the phallus. It's right there in the... I mean, they don't do that in Christianity, but again, this erotic energy is the generative driving energy of the universe, and they seek to harness it. So here is the grid for the tower. Now, notice that, I'm telling you this is the grid, but the walls are not lining up with the grid exactly. And that's because the intersections on the grid are where energy flows. And putting a wall directly on one of these grid points will block the proper energy flows. So here's the lingam tower, here's the womb cavern, and here's the lingam, male phallus. And then they make sacrifices on here. Hopefully milk and honey, occasionally a goat gets sacrificed. Here is Sun Temple and Konarak, and I told you, now this one, this is the womb cavern. The tower has fallen down on this one right here. So we have this is collapsed. But this is a chariot. Here are the wheels and here are the horses. So the Hindu temple is the cart or chariot of the invading Indo-Europeans. So it's all these different things. So here's that cart, and here it is the wheels and the horses. And here are these copulating couples at the centers of or on the spokes of each wheel that drive it forward, the driving energies. So, individual worship, cart or chariot of the spirit, model of the Hindu caste system, model of Hindu worldview, three-dimensional mandalas or yantras, same thing, and they harmonize space, sound, and energy. Now, I'm going to look real quick at Angkor Wat, then we'll take a break, and then we will look at Buddhism, and we're going to get out a little bit early. But I better talk faster. So, here we are over in, so here's India. Now we go over to Cambodia. And this culture spreads. And we have a kingdom that combines Hindu and Buddhist traditions. We have stone corbel vaulting, and I have the true vault. And these Kampuchea or Cambodia in the Khmer kingdoms of the 12th century. And these things are big. This is Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom are the two big ones. And they have found a way of making, extremely fertile agriculture in these tropical wet forests. These things get totally overrun, just the way the Mayan stuff did, by the tropical forests once you stop cutting back on them. There's a head in here you can barely see. These are the kinds of irrigation waterways they had. So these Khmer kings built these complexes, and there's a fundamental myth around which they're developed, and with this tower, which again is a lingam, at its center, it's a sacred lingam, which is also imbued with the power of the divine kingship. And it's a world mountain, another tradition from shamanism. Incredible plans of these elaborate things. They're continually being eroded by wars and stuff. Here are our corbel vaults. Serpents everywhere, reminiscent of what we saw in Mexico. And the foundational myth is the churning of the sea of milk. So Asuras and Devas, Asuras are gods and Devas are devils. The world was chaotic. And so Vishnu offers himself as the great churning host, in where you churn cream to get butter, and they wrap a giant serpent around him and pull back and forth. And the gods and the demons cooperate on this. It's depicted all over the complexes. And pull back and forth. And at one point, a poisonous blue smoke comes out, which Vishnu grabs and holds in his throat. He can't swallow it, it would kill him, but he can hold it in his throat. And eventually, the world solidifies into a coherent state. So the purpose of this thing is to bring order out of a chaotic world.